what do we do you think, to make people smarter again? I keep saying that being smart is now counterculture. Culture is dumb right now. And when I meet smart people, I'm like, thank God.
Culture is gleefully dumb. That's the problem.
Right.
I don't know that as a culture, we're probably smarter than we've ever been.
Right.
You're right. There's this attitude that book learning is somehow anti-American, knowledge is suspect, science is political. It's very much an up is down, down is up kind of world. But I still think that's a minority of the country that really believes that.
Yeah, I firmly believe it's a minority, but it's the minority that we keep hearing from. Sure. I mean, that's what I keep saying in the political side. It's like we hear from the crazies on the left and we hear from the crazies on the right. And I would argue that most people, I think really 80% of us, actually want pretty decent things and pretty similar things. I think if you're if you're just a regular conservative, you don't want a world that's very different from what the average liberal really wants. No. You might have a couple of policies. So how do we get those voices to be heard again?
Well, for one thing, I think it's important for the larger national dialogue to state what you just stated, which is true. And I would say it's even larger than 80%. We all essentially want the same things. We want safe communities. We want opportunities for our kids. We want the ability to make a little money and feel like if we, to use the tritest political expression, work hard and play by the rules, we'll get ahead. That's basically all people want.
Right.
On both sides. So if conservatives can agree with that statement and liberals can agree with that statement, you go, fine. We know where we're going. It's really just a question of tactics on how we get there. That's where we disagree. Mm-hmm. But as long as we keep in mind that the goal is the same, I think we can work together.
Yeah.
But we become so, and this is largely a result of the entertainment aspect of journalism. We've become so polarized because that's what drives eyeballs to television screens, is people yelling at each other as opposed to people having comity and being like, oh yeah, we agree. We basically agree.
Right. And I mean, and that's, and that's it. Right, exactly right. But the irony is people want that. I know they want it because they're messaging me every day saying that what I'm doing here is what they want to see.
We get it. You're important. We get it. You're doing God's work. We get it, Dave.
Well, listen, if 100 other people were doing this, I would gladly find something else to do. You know what I mean? I really would. And that would show a good sign that some smarter things have occurred here.
Yeah, I wrote a book a few years ago with my friend Megan McCain.
I wanted to ask you about that, yeah.
And that was essentially the central thesis of the book, which is we all kind of want the same things. Mm-hmm. We differ on the margins maybe a bit about guns, for example. But even then we don't, because conservatives and liberals both want gun deaths to fall.
Right.
It's just a question of how we get there. There's a certain disingenuousness, I think, on the part of the right about how we get there, and in fact, entirely disingenuousness. But just from a purely philosophical point of view, both sides would like to reduce gun deaths.
Yeah.
So then it's just how do we get there?
So when you wrote that book, and that's actually when I had you on my SiriusXM show many lifetimes ago, when you wrote that, and I think I had Megan on maybe the next week or something, what made you think like, oh, I should talk to her because she's in it. Her dad's a pretty powerful guy who ran for president, and but she's on the right. And do you consider yourself on the left? Or
yeah.
do you just So what made you think that this is
triple parentheses?
You got a couple more parentheses out there, I think. Yeah. What made you think let me talk to her and let's do this?
Well, that was
it was ahead
reason.
of it. Yeah.
That was the reason. It was she's somebody who I should have very little in common with. Let's go on the road together and write a book.
Yeah.
And see if we can sort of bring these issues to light a little bit. And we did. It was fun. And we wrote a good book, and nobody bought it because nobody wants to hear that we're more similar than dissimilar.
Yeah, that's the thing I want to unpack with this more than anything else, is we've got to get past it. And it's I turn on CNN and it's people think they're watching news, and they're not watching news. They are literally watching Wolf Blitzer debate between a Trump spokesman and a Hillary spokesman, and people think that that's news. Meanwhile, Brexit happens, and I watched CNN almost a full day just trying to see, what are they going to show us? It was on in the background. I didn't have the audio on the whole time. But, there was nothing. There was, like one 30-second thing every 4 hours.
Right.
So it's like our media is just making us dumb too.
Yes and no. I think there's a certain percentage of the population that will look at the coverage of Brexit and be curious enough to want to understand more what that means. And there's a much larger percentage of the population that understands the headline of what Brexit is and doesn't need to pursue that any further.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a certain amount of the population who doesn't give a shit. but I mean, hasn't that always been the way?
Yeah.
Hasn't it always been the case that if anything, I feel like we're more engaged as a nation than we've ever been, almost because we can't help but be. And I think that's good and bad. I think what's going on in the country right now, there's absolutely a Pollyanna-ish way of looking at it and saying this is actually quite good what's happening.
Right.
That there is, I mean, aside from people just being gunned down in the streets, which isn't great.
So that you're saying that the issues that are being earthed up are good. The question is,
issues that are being dredged up
yeah,
are necessary issues. And they're being brought to the fore by two imperfect messengers. And that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So as we're taping this right now, Black Lives Matter is in like the throes of, there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, between the shootings of the black people that has obviously been going on for quite some time, but these last few in particular, and now the protests against it, and then the cop shootings and everything else. Where do you kind of fall on all of this stuff? Because I find it very hard, and even as I'm prefacing this, I know that no matter what we say right now, a certain amount of people are going to hate it. No, you know what I mean? Even if they agree with us on 99%, if we say one word the wrong way, people will start freaking. But so I haven't talked about it that much because I find it's very hard to decipher what's actually happening by watching little clips of things.
Well, there's a few things we know that are happening.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Black Lives Matter side of it. And incidentally, I don't think these are two opposing sides, but just separating them out. We know that black people are being killed by police. We know that. We've known it for years. We've known it for generations. We've known it for centuries. Black people get killed. What changed is obviously the ability to live stream those deaths as they're occurring. It has changed the dialogue. It's very hard for white people to now say, or not to live in any kind of denial about that now, when you see the evidence presented in front of you. And there's a lot of white people trying very hard to maintain that denial.
Yeah.
Very hard.
Yeah.
But I think most of us look at that and go, oh yeah, what you were saying for the last 300 years, I guess that's right.
Yeah. The blatant denial people are the ones that drive me nuts, because you could say that we can get to the other part of this too, and you can say there's some legitimate issues there, but it's the people that no matter what happens, no matter what evidence they're shown, they immediately go to that.
Well, it goes to character assassination immediately.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
Somebody had, weed in the car or whatever. Well, they deserve to get shot. No.
Right.
No, they didn't.
Right.
So there's that side of it. And then the other side is that violence gets redirected towards police, and I haven't heard anybody defend that in any way, shape, or form, other than a couple crazy people on Twitter just being idiots. But the two ideas are not opposed. We shouldn't be killing people. Mm-hmm. Like let's just start with that central premise. People are dying unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And I believe that there is a incredibly entrenched, and there's no polite word for it, racist culture in police culture. I've seen enough evidence and read enough accounts and spent enough time looking at it and into it to suggest that that is a problem, mm-hmm. a real problem, a genuine problem, for probably a plethora of historical and cultural reasons. So something's broken with policing, and I think always has been, but now we're just seeing it. That needs to change. The idea that the police force we've come to think of more and more as a militarized force, as an extension of the military, that has to change.
It's weird. It's weird that, sorry to cut you off, but it's weird that people don't see that piece of it, where when we have these tanks out there, or not tanks, but these armored vehicles on our streets.
It happened
and
very
that doesn't
gradually.
feel, and that doesn't feel like, if you were just looking at it, removing the specifics, we have armored tanks on our streets. Forget why they're there, but that in and of itself, this
It's
seems
alarming.
like a problem.
Like you should have to call the National Guard. If you need a tank, pick up the phone, call Gomer Pyle, have him bring the tank. There's no reason the police forces need them, but what it does is it inculcates an us versus them mentality, both from the police's point of view and from the community's point of view. And the idea of community policing is lost. The idea of to protect and serve is lost because it's become these police precincts, I think in many communities, have come to feel like occupying forces as opposed to extensions of the community. It's a real problem. The fact that police routinely recruit from the military, I think, is a problem. There's no real linkage between those two organizations. The police are paramilitary to a certain extent. But the local police force, in my mind, should be essentially liaisons from the law enforcement to the community. And it should be a partnership. It should be a two-way street.
Right. So an army is dealing with enemy combatants, but that's not the way that police obviously should do their communities.
By definition, an army is dealing with an opposing force.
Yeah.
And when you recruit from the military to fill out your police ranks, I have a hard time believing that they're not going to bring that mentality to policing. And it infects the entire culture. And it's been that way now for, I think, decades.
So what do you make of, because one of the things that I've struggled with is when I see the protests and they're in the middle of the street where they're not supposed to be, on highways and things, and when they've been burning cars or whatever it is, or looting stores and things. Look, those things are not legal. You're allowed to protest, but you can't shut down highways and all that stuff. And usually the cop, not always, of course, but usually you see the cops basically trying to keep law and order. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy here, right?
Well,
because you do something illegal, even if the intentions are good. Let's say your motives are good, but you shut down a highway, which you can't do. Now the cops have to do something, and now you've created this stalemate here, and now, of course, everyone's got cameras in everybody's face, and they're just waiting for the pin drop to set the whole thing off. So how do we unfurl some of that?
Well, you've given two different examples that I think are not quite the same. To me, there's a big difference between sitting down in the middle of a highway and burning a car and looting a store.
Sure, but both are illegal.
Both are illegal, but one is causing property damage and destruction and is essentially a violent act versus the nonviolent protest of sitting down in the middle of a highway. It is illegal.
But you could be stopping ambulances that need to get places and all kinds of other stuff. But you could also do those sit-downs in a park.
You can.
But you don't get the fanfare.
And protest is about spectacle. That is its point. So I may be annoyed at the people sitting in the middle of the highway, but I don't have the same reaction to that as I do to people being destructive in their community. And I think I think sitting down in a highway is a perfectly viable nonviolent demonstration. Where I think Black Lives Matter is falling short, and I was reading this commentator on Twitter, Oliver Willis, who was talking about this all night. Without a directed legislative agenda, it's so much smoke, but it can't catch fire. There's no substance there. And I think that's true. I think at this point, the Black Lives Matter umbrella, because it's not an organization.
Right.
It's whoever wants Black Lives Matter can claim it.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever can, you can claim yourself to be a member of Black Lives Matter, and you are. But it needs more directed leadership. It needs to have some stated legislative and policy goals. Otherwise, all you're doing is you're raising awareness for something that people already know exists.
Yeah. Is the inherent problem with that, though, that they feel the system has failed them, either true or not? So their goal is to make waves, not necessarily, like they're trying to change the system in a way that the system doesn't want to change. Like that's where this thing's at loggerheads, right?
Yeah, but
if a guy came out and said, I have this legislation that's going to do this and this and this, it's almost like, well, the protesters wouldn't be down with that.
That's possible because, again, it's the blank slate theory. It's easy to say, I project all my hopes onto X candidate, X political movement. It's much harder to go to then take the next step to Y and Z and saying, well, here are some legislative differences we can make. And it's not going to be perfect, because it never is, but we can move ourselves forward in fits and starts.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
Wouldn't it be fun to talk about some of this stuff with some level of comedy involved? But I get you. I get you. Like it's.
I warned you in an email. I'm like, prepare for me not to be funny. I'm not going to be funny.
And I said I wanted one applause break. We don't even have a studio audience, but I was hoping for one minor applause break there.
I don't know how to talk about this stuff in a funny way. I mean, I just find it interesting. I mean, I'm just some dude who reads the newspaper and is just interested in it and doesn't pretend to know how to make it funny.
Yeah. Are there any comics right now that you really think are hitting this out of the park? Just sort of the general
John
cultural
Oliver,
or political stuff? Yeah.
You know, the people who came from The Daily Show, I think, are still doing the best work in that arena.
Yeah, we need John back, right? I had some issues with him, but I think we need him back.
He was the best.
Yeah.
And I think he is coming back, right? He's got some HBO.
He's going to do like little snippets on HBO or something. But I mean, sort of that nightly long form.
It would be great. It really would be.
Yeah. So let's shift to movies and comedy and TV, but we can probably circle it back to some horrific societal stuff and end of civilization stuff. But in case society ends, I want you to at least be able to share your thoughts on some of the movies you've made and some of the other stuff.
I'd rather talk about wonky shit.
We could. All right. We'll you know what? 5 minutes of it.
All right.
I was going to go for 12 to 15. We'll do 5 minutes of it, and then we'll finish back with all this stuff. So first off, I was telling you right before we sat down that you were in Wet Hot American Summer, which I hadn't seen until about a year ago, even though I went to one of those camps. I went to Camp Shenawanda up in Pennsylvania, and I thought it was one of the most absolutely hilarious movies I've ever seen. I watched the series on Netflix, which now you just told me you're writing for season 2, right? Mm-hmm. Which is pretty great, but you didn't write for season 1.
I did not write for season 1. I did not write the movie.
Yeah. Is that hard for you in a movie like that where there's it's so many of your friends obviously writing, and you didn't get to write, but you have to just act it? Is that harder than if you're writing for it and acting in it?
No. I mean, I've been friends with all of those guys essentially my entire adult life, so it's as if I wrote it.
Yeah.
You know, we share a sensibility, so it was just fun.
Yeah.
And it's not like they were so precious with the words that you couldn't.
So they let you kind of do your thing. I would imagine you guys are having a great time because it's such a great.
It's really fun.
Yeah.
And now I'm nervous writing for it because I feel like I have something to live up to as a writer, which I didn't have just showing up on set. So I'm conscious of not fucking up something that I think is really funny.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna pack all the comedy stuff in real quick. So you're working on like 87 other things. You're on Gaffigan. You're doing something that I just saw a billboard.
Another period.
Yeah. So I haven't seen it, but it's like it's like a takeoff Downton Abbey. Is that sort of
Downton Abbey? It's as if. Well, they pitched it to me as the Kardashians meets Downton Abbey, and that's essentially what it is, and it's really funny.
Yeah. All right. So I need. What channel is it on?
Comedy Central.
I should know that. I should have known that. Yeah. I apologize. We have ruined the whole interview.
It doesn't matter to me. I'm not here to plug shit.
You're not plugging.
I'm here.
You're not plugging. You said, well, let's talk about the real stuff.
That's all I want to talk about.
All right, let's circle back to the real stuff. So
I mean, I've got other shows out too. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm on a lot of shows.
What's your favorite thing that out of all the things you've done? See, so I always associate you with the I Love the 80s stuff, which probably does that cause you to like roll your eyes kind of like it was?
No.
But you were like, it was almost as if that whole genre of stuff, which, you know, they did a zillion shows after that, Best Week Ever, and I Love the 70s, I Love the 90s, I Love the 20s, or whatever else. And now every channel has those shows too. But you were sort of the one that like got it. Did you kind of you figured out what that thing was, that commentary thing was? I think in a way that some of the other people maybe didn't get.
Well, when it first started, it was much more sincere. It was much more like Soleil Moon Frye going, oh, do you remember Wacky Wall Crawlers? Oh, I miss Wacky Wall Crawlers.
Right.
And that was never my approach to it. My approach was just make jokes.
Yeah.
I feel totally comfortable shitting on your childhood right now. And that, yeah, eventually the tone of it shifted more towards that than the can you remember Wacky Wall Crawlers tone.
Yeah. Speaking of the 80s, does Sega Genesis do anything for you? 'Cause
No.
Nothing?
No. It
Sega
was
Genesis
after my time.
That was, so you're 8-bit Nintendo or ColecoVision or?
ColecoVision, Intellivision, Atari 2600.
Wow. So even 8-bit Nintendo, we only have 5 years apart.
Technology changes, man.
Yeah.
It moves very fast.
Yeah.
I had graduated from video games and by the time the Sega Genesis came out.